Right, so we are looking at a junior in high school's mechanics here. So let's dive in. Let's go right into it. We're gonna watch the full clip, obviously the side view and the back view as we always do here, synced up. So gonna go ahead and see what we got and dive into his mechanics. Let's watch that back one more time. So first thing kind of I'm seeing here that I like, I guess I'll start with like what I like. I like his aggressive stride. Um, he's able to really get down the mound athletically without getting lungy. A lot of times when you see guys with long aggressive strides, they end up just throwing their weight forward. So he does a good job here of being aggressive with that front side, with that front leg, and still keeping his weight relatively back, not diving forward. Um, and obviously that's a from the side view a good position. The arm there is in an odd spot a little bit, but in a general sense, though, I mean the hips are starting to fire through. He's getting some shoulder hip there, and he's able to kind of fly the arm there through for the ride. Um, I do see he's very tilty there. So as you can see here, you can see it from the side view. So super tilt guy. Obviously, like I said, tilt is got some guys are big tilt guys. Some guys keep their shoulders straighter. Some guys actually are negative tilt where they tilt down, which I don't love. But he definitely has to fight a little hard being in that position, just straight almost north and south there to be able to get his shoulders and his arm back on path, which he's kind of able to. His elbow does look a little low here compared to where the shoulder is. It's kind of what I was saying, the position of the arm back here. I don't love it, but overall, I mean, he has an athletic delivery. I like his little pseudo wind up here where he's just takes a nice easy step, kind of gets some momentum, timing, gets deep into that back leg. Like I said, I don't love the tilt, but an aggressive stride down the mound. So I don't know if you want to kind of chime in here, your initial
Yeah,
thoughts of what you see.
yeah. I was gonna say I think we do know stride length is correlated to velocity a little bit, but there's a pretty wide spectrum of how much stride is going to help. Like, there's a lot of guys that perform really high level at 80% of their body height, and there's some guys that get all the way out to 120 percent of their height. And so a lot of that I think is going to be predicated on like what his anatomy is. And so I think he is going to have to be a pretty hyper mobile guy. He's going to have pretty good mobility to kind of work through these like big patterns that you get. So you mentioned his arm action too. Like, he gets his arm into a pretty abnormal spot. It's a little bit long. And I think as long as he has enough mobility that he can tolerate getting into those positions, um, and he can kind of get into those really long positions and get out of them smoothly, that we don't have to be super worried about it. But if we notice like he's getting stuck, he's, has kind of like this one miss where he's always missing high and right or something. It might be something that, we have to kind of shorten him up. My initial thoughts, though, just looking at his delivery as a whole, is I think he gets into a pretty good drift, but it might almost be too aggressive of the drift where when he drops that hit down, he like really drops it downhill, and it almost creates like too much speed or too much momentum that his timing's off just slightly. And so I mean, and we know like that speed is going to help him throw hard, but it's almost like he's a purely momentum thrower here sometimes and just isn't giving his body enough time to create consistent rotation getting through there. And I think
Yeah,
we see that a little bit with that trail leg finish where that like really whips out to the side just because the rotation, it's not, he doesn't buy himself enough time to get into a rotational position that he almost has like this really, really wide, like rotary component to his delivery, which,
yeah.
to be honest, might not be the end of the world, but it'd be something that he could play with. Is probably trying to like drift a little bit less on that drop, like drop a little bit more like inside that back ankle rather than
Yeah.
dropping his hips down the mound and then seeing if he has a little bit better timing or if he sees the velo spike with it.
Yeah, and I think too that kind of that drop we're looking at here, I also think it kind of goes hand in hand with what I was referring to, like that straight uphill shoulder tilt, that the way that he's sitting into his back leg, he's just he's drift sitting and just riding that front hip or even that back hip to lead the way, which we always talk about is good, but it may be too aggressive to the point where it it forces his back shoulder to drop because of the way that he's dropping in. His hip is actually uphill now as
Yeah.
well, so the shoulders and the hip are because of the way he's sitting down into that back leg. And then again, I think it also, like I said, if you're looking at this position here, like I like this position he gets himself into here, the side angle. But I do think that because he's so aggressively down the hill, down the mound with that drift, that initial movement, it just forces too much, like exactly what you're saying, too much momentum down the mound to the point where he ends up getting sped up at the end of his delivery. And you kind of see everything just like crash into that front leg together. So I do think for him, like people always say you don't want to make non-drifters drifters and guys who are drifters, you don't want to tell them to not drift. But I do think in this scenario, kind of working with him a little more north and south rather than drifting down the mound could help him out because I'm a natural drifter myself as well. So I always kind of wanted to be up and down, sitting up and down, thinking over the rubber. Obviously, I'm going to be drifting down, and no matter what, when you're a drifter, you're going to drift. So I
Yeah.
think if we work with him a little less drift, a little bit, sitting like straight down in that back leg without such an aggressive initial movement down the mound, he's still going to be an athletic drifter. So I think we just need to slow it down just a tad, and I think that could clean up a lot of things with his delivery because like I said, I do like his overall mechanics. Um, there's a couple things that, and I think that they all kind of could get cleaned up together. We're talking the shoulders, that back shoulder drifting, a super. I'm sorry, dropping low, that uphill shoulder tilt, uphill with the hips, okay, and that arm getting kind of put into a weird spot here. I think all three of those things, if he's a little less aggressive with that drift forward, could potentially kind of clean themselves up. And again, if he's able to get in this position with his arm and he has good arm action and good arm speed and his arm's not late, then that's his arm pad, that's his arm action, and if it works for him, it's great. But I do, and that's not. I'm not saying I want to change it, but I do think if he is less aggressive with his drift and all the other things we're referring to, I think that his arm action or that position, his arm, and it actually would naturally change for the better,
Yeah,
and get put in.
I was gonna say I think it like buying a little bit more time there, it might make him a little bit like being a little bit patient there. It might give him a little bit more time to get into a little bit natural layback rather than getting kind of this like long arm action where it all kind of comes
Yeah.
through. And he might see
Yep.
a little bit of velo spike if he can kind of rotate a little bit tighter there and just
For
adding a
sure.
little bit of like rotational velocity to that entire component. Um, but yeah, it's always going to be a spectrum, right? We're going to have these guys that are big drift guys. We're going to have these guys that are like whippy rotation guys. And we're not saying like we need to make someone that drifts a lot like a superb rotator, but we need
Yeah.
to kind of find the right like balance there, right? If you
Yep.
and like just giving him a little bit more rotation might help his velocity. And you could have another guy that's all takes a super short stride and he just kind of like whips it all with his body. Like adding a little bit of drift to a guy like that or adding a little bit momentum there might help him get to that next level of velocity too. And so just kind of
For
figuring out the
sure.
right balance between momentum and rotation for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing too, kind of not in this specific case, but in a general sense, that a lot of times people will, they'll or coaches in general, they'll kind of group you into wherever you may be at that specific that in that time, whatever. So junior in high school here, right now, we're labeling him as he's a drifter, right? So he's athletic down the mound, he creates good momentum. And that's how he's able to throw pretty well. Like you said, there's different categories of quote unquote pitchers. Um, so what's really important is to not just confine yourself and say, okay, I'm a drifter and I need to just figure out what works for drifters or what has worked. Like test the limits to what you can do and what you can teach your body to do. I think that like a lot of times people are like, oh, let them do what they naturally do, which is true. Like we're saying, he's a guy who has good drift, creates good momentum down the mound. We're not going to don't do that anymore, but we're going to
Right.
tell him, hey, maybe let's try to be more rotational. You don't have to be so aggressive down the mountain. Like be a little more patient and just try different cues with him that may not fit the mold of what you would typically tell someone, a drifter, or someone you want to be, uh, drifting or whatever it may be. So I think a lot of times, like I said, people just say, "Oh, let them naturally do what they do. Let them be who they are," which absolutely. But you also have to test the limits to and figure out and do doing and see if some things work for you. So that's another thing, just kind of separate, but just wanted to chime in there and just kind of
Yeah.
say that I think that it's really important to, just especially as a coach, just recognize that just because uh, someone who similar, say we have a similar arm to this, similar mechanics to him, a different athlete, and we did something with him and it worked. It doesn't mean it's going to work for him as well. So it's like we have to just try different things and see what works and really treat each athlete as its own case. I think a lot of times with coaches and with everything, which there's nothing wrong with having some basic structure and grouping and saying, okay, you this is how you move, you should be working on this, and you move this way, you should be working on this, just from a generic grouping standpoint, which is there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, test the limits, see what works for each athlete, and don't get too comfortable and don't think you can't do certain things because I don't do that. That's not how my body moves, or I don't have enough mobility to do that, or I can't do this. I like just try it out, and you never know, it could work.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone's an individual there and you want to play into those strengths, right? So we need to make sure that we're helping him improve on his strengths. While also like you can't have just some huge deficiency there. Like you want to make those what he does maybe not as good. We want to make that, let's say you get that to average and then take his strength and make his strength great and give him the
Absolutely.
best chance. Like he's a junior in high school, he's gonna have um I know he's been up to like 84, 85. Like he to make that next step there, he's got to figure out just where he can find a little bit more. And maybe he's tapped out with how much he can find from his momentum or how much he can find from creating that positive move down. And so maybe taking a step back from that positive move and kind of trying to focus a little bit more on rotation is going to actually help him find a little bit more consistency or a little bit more velocity where it's going to play a little bit better for him and give him a brighter future.
Absolutely.
Um, I can tell you from having to work with him, like for a while we were focusing on that front leg where he's sometimes the guy, and if you kind of play it through there, he's sometimes the guy that like used to get a little bit stuck on that landing. I think it was from that overdrift or just so much momentum and like so much of a stride that he's just late rotating down to that front side. Or maybe not even late with his rotation, but just like pulling through that front leg. It takes a little bit longer to get that center of mass forward to a point where he can create that rotation through the front side. But actually, like if you're looking at it here, it's not terrible. Like
Yeah.
I think he does it decently well. Um, and it's just like it might be that overdrift that's causing him to be like a little bit long, both with that backside basically. And
Yeah.
so I think we're right there. If we can kind of, and we'd have to play with it, you know what? Like let's say we make a change and we see his velocity tick down by 2, 3 miles an hour. It's probably not a good change for him, and we're probably doing more harm than we are good. Like a lot of times, like mechanics only matter so much within context. Like you have to see a velocity jumper, you have to see a performance boost to go with these mechanical changes. Because at the
Absolutely.
end of the day, there's a lot of guys that throw 95, 96 with mechanics that are really abnormal. It's not a
Hmm.
one size fits all, but it's generally like in that puzzle piece, we're going to see like guys need some combo of that momentum and some combo of that rotational velocity. And I think adding a little bit tighter rotation to him would be that next step for Brandon.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at drifters, last thing I'll kind of talk to just kind of pop here. When you're looking at drifters, guys who are really aggressive with their front, with their step. The main thing you're trying to look at is to making sure that they're not like kind of lunging down the mound, and also making sure that they're able to stop their weight and effectively block with their front leg. And you see here, I mean, you see his foot kind of slide out a little bit, and that's just because we're on turf, or he's wearing turfs on a
Rubber
non-dirt
surface.
mound.
Yeah.
But for the most part, though, like he is aggressive down the mound, and he is able to right at foot strike stop his weight from going forward and let everything kind of come
Yeah.
around it. Obviously, we talked about everything kind of crashing in on the backside. Strictly looking at that front leg, though, like that, I don't see that. I guess the aggressive stride per se the issue. I think we have to slow things down, be a little more patient, um, and see if we can create a little bit more rotation with that, and paired up with that aggressive stride, and I think you could see a velo jump there for sure. So
Yeah, I think that's the probably the most important thing we'll say here is like that lead leg block that everyone talks about, or that block or that stop of center mass there. It can't come with a forced front leg knee extension. It has to happen natural from rotation. Like it just
yeah,
has to be a natural thing that happens from that body rather than them trying to like force it and kind of like kick themselves forward over the
yeah, yeah,
top.
yeah.
And that'll be something that, yeah, like we need to make sure that this stays kind of like a natural movement, that he gets that natural block. And that's something kind of we're always looking at here. Now, I'm going to challenge your bias here. He hasn't been pitching for more than six months or so.
Wow,
What
I did not know that.
what position what position would might be the last position you'll pick? What position do you think he used to be?
I would say third base is my gut.
I think he probably played a little bit. He was actually a catcher, which is
Catcher,
really abnormal based
crazy
on that
with the.
arm path, right?
Yeah, I was gonna. I'm like thinking long arm action. I don't see him as an outfielder. That would have been my first guess. I was like, well, who's gonna have a little bit of a longer arm action? It's not gonna be a shortstop or second baseman.
Yeah,
Definitely not a catcher. That is interesting. But I mean, he's got some pretty damn good mechanics. He's only pitched for 6 months, so I think he's got to keep working, um, keep trusting the process, keep testing the limits, try new things. Obviously, we're working with him here, and we're gonna mess around with some more rotational stuff, which I'm sure we already have, and definitely with less drift in that initial sit here, and see if we can sit a little bit deeper into that backside without kind of just letting everything fall forward. And I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. So,
yeah, absolutely. Hopefully he makes that jump here. It'll be fun to watch over the next 6 months.
oh yeah, cool. Anything else we want to toss in here?
No, I think I'm good. I think it's that same thing. And we need to make sure he kind of sits a little bit down towards that back foot, not on top of the back foot, but just down towards that back foot first, like taking that right hip down the mound at an angle
Yeah,
there. And
yeah,
I know they've done some physics experiments with like the fastest way to a point isn't always just in a straight line downhill, or it's actually like down in the curve. And that would be
down
something
in the
we'd want to
curve.
look at here with him is like, can we get him down and then across rather than just like that straight line down the mound there?
Yeah,
And maybe that'll get his hips a little bit more on plane and kind of clean everything up for him.
yeah. Also, now, kind of just want to toss this in here, last second here. I'm thinking too, potentially he's using his arm down here to counterbalance such an aggressive front side with the drift, and it's almost like he drops his arm and his shoulder back down to balance himself with everything going so aggressive down, which then could lead to why he has this super long arm action and get arm. I mean, his arm is crazy, just straight back here.
Yeah.
And it could be from, and we already kind of said everything always works together. Even if you think something isn't gonna, you know, help something else out. A lot of times, if you clean something up, it's gonna help. It's not gonna fully clean something else up, but it's gonna aid in another issue down the line. Um, but uh, looking at that now, that could potentially be a reason why he has that super long arm action. It's because he's kind of using it to actually balance his body, be aggressive with the drift and the stride. So just a little extra thought there that I just kind of saw. But yeah, we're definitely gonna work with him on
Yeah.
rotation and see if we can make some good changes here.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great thought. I actually hadn't considered that he's just kind of dropping his shoulders back and he's
Yeah,
dropping
just
that arm really deep as that counterweight.
yeah,
And yeah, it probably is a product of just trying to like drift and sit so far down the mound rather than just trying to like be a little bit more patient on that backside and give his
for
body
sure.
time. And yeah, he might be a guy that has to find a little bit more timing, especially like a guy that doesn't have a whole lot of experience throwing downhill. Like it's almost like his body's gonna probably continue to self adjust as he spends more
Oh
time
yeah,
throwing on a slope.
for sure. All right, cool. All right. Well, I
Yeah,
think we're good to go here. Yeah.
yeah,
Good stuff.
yeah. Another good one.
All right. Ended that.